Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Writer with No Hands. Our story begins with Matthew Alford as a failing journalist, living in a neglected house with two small children and his ex-wife. But Matthew is soon to discover an explosive secret, an unpublished autopsy report which alleges that a Hollywood screenwriter was murdered in a staged car accident. So please welcome to the stage, all the way from Bath, it's Matthew Alford! Yay! Hi, everybody! I'm Matthew Alford! Hey, yo! As you can see, I am a very, very confident person who's achieved nothing in his life. I've qualified with all of the things, and then I've done nothing with them at all. I actually moved to Bath to do a PhD. Yes, I did. I moved to Bath to do a PhD. The title of my thesis was An Application of Ed Herman and Noam Chomsky's Propaganda Model to Hollywood Cinema from 1990 to 2002. And believe you me, after doing 8 years of that, the only doctor in Britain who was less employable than me was Harold Shipman. The only doctor in Europe who was less employable than me was Radovan Karadzic. And if you don't know who that was, this is going to be a very long 48.5 minutes. All of my remaining material is about overqualified Bosnians, so war criminals from the early 1990s. So, yeah. Okay, look, I'm not a comedian because of being confident or not being confident. I'm not a comedian because I was bullied at school or anything like that. I'm a comedian really because of this book, The Writer with No Hands. Do you ever have those moments in your life when you feel like you're in your own movie? You get that sudden traumatic self-consciousness, and then that kind of curiously pleasurable sense that you're hurtling through time and space with no control over whatever monstrous set of events has befallen you. I had those moments while doing this book, but they lasted for really unnaturally long periods of time, like bursts of weeks and months, and then it was suddenly all over. I first came across the name Gary DeVore when I was co-writing a feature article for the Guardian newspaper with a colleague, Robbie Graham. And it was about the role of the CIA in Hollywood. Gary DeVore was a Hollywood screenwriter, and his breakthrough script was this meticulously well-researched story about mercenaries called Dogs of War. And he'd gone on to write for some of the leading men of the 1980s and 1990s, people like Tommy Lee Jones and Kurt Russell and Arnold Schwarzenegger. He had actually, Gary wrote one of Schwarzenegger's favorite scenes, which is, I'm not saying is saying much, in the scene. It's from a film called Raw Deal from 1986, which I loved when I was like 8. Because it's all just like blowing up bad guys and Arnie on a rampage. And in the film, Gary's written this scene where Schwarzenegger's on-screen wife is really pissed off at him because he's like forgotten their anniversary or having like sexist crap. And so she takes to the gin cabinet in the afternoon and makes her own wedding anniversary cake and scrawls on the cake in icing the word shit, and then lobs it at Schwarzenegger. And Schwarzenegger, he comes through the door, dodges to one side, and says, wags his finger and says, "Do not drink and bake." But to really understand who Gary DeVore was beyond the kind of cheesy movies that he did sometimes back in at those points, you got to get this. Gary started dressing like a cowboy when he was 5. And he was still dressing like a cowboy when he was 55. Hat, boots, even the gun. One night, Gary was driving through the Mojave Desert on his way home after finishing a script, which was about the 1989 US invasion of Panama. Gary was traveling through a part of the desert called Aerospace Valley. a sort of secret industrial wasteland that was home of all the major arms companies, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and of course, Edwards Air Force Base. When just suddenly he vanished. And there was this huge manhunt that ensued. Helicopters, sniffer dogs, psychics, horses, biker gangs, all coordinated by his wife, local sheriffs and the FBI, but not a whisper, not a sound. A year goes by, no leads, and then this traveling salesman goes a couple of hours outside of his normal route, and he takes a detour to the California aqueduct. It's already been searched. And what he does is he gets out of his car, he walks down the embankment at the side of the aqueduct where the water's running through. And he gets down into the silt and he finds a tiny fragment of plastic. He takes the fragment to a local Ford dealership and they identify it as belonging to Gary's car, as a piece of tail light. Within hours, the vehicle was dredged from the water. Gary's partially skeletonized body, still dressed in his signature cowboy gear, is dredged out with it. But there's a problem. The skeleton has no hands. The police theorized that for Gary to have ended up in that stretch of water, he would have had to have driven 2 miles against oncoming traffic without noticing, and then driven through the only bit of the motorway guardrail, freeway guardrail, that where there was a gap. It was just 3 meters wide. Now, people do sometimes die in cases of wrong way driving. And people do sometimes disappear. But people do not disappear during cases of wrong way driving. Because if you're going 2 miles against oncoming traffic, you tend to stick out. And there were some other problems with the accident as a theory. It seemed all the more peculiar because Gary's laptop had floated away during the accident and his gun, even though some smaller and lighter items like a vase, little pewter vase that he bought for his wife, Wendy, didn't float away. They stayed in the vehicle. And he would have been driving blind because his car had these redented headlamps and they were turned into the off position. Was this somehow a case of foul play? Were Gary's body and the tail light somehow planted there? So I emailed a few people who may have known Gary DeVore, but he didn't really have any family, like no one except for his widow, Wendy. And she hadn't even made a public statement in 10 years. And even then, only to threaten to sue the Highways Agency for making this sort of inexplicably dicey piece of road. Whatever. I mean, I didn't even have time for this. I mean, I had a book to finish. I had 2 children to raise, a marriage to endure, a cat to worm and work to find. And I was failing at least half of these tasks. The Guardian published mine and Robbie's piece, which included this cute little paragraph that we'd done, highlighting the theory, unmentioned outside of the Californian underbelly until that point, that Gary's fate had been tied up somehow with the intelligence community. We made 600 quid and that was it. There was no accolades, there was no follow-up, no one asked us anything. We weren't asked to do anything else. We weren't in. Hello? What do you want to know about DeVore? Who is this? Michael Sands. I had no idea who this was. Michael Sands, publicist to Gary Martin DeVore, Defense Department contractor, actor, international model. I still had no idea who this was. You know, Matthew, I like you already. Listen, the California Highway Patrol wrote a report on the crash, but we all knew that it was bull. He sent me a copy. There's a whole bunch of weird shit, you know, Matt. Did you know Gary was filming at Area 51? Well, yeah, but I want to do, if anything, I want to do like a forensic reinvestigation, like of a cold case. I can't be distracted by every crazy conspiracy theory and lead. Listen, Gary was working on a script called The Big Steal, set during our invasion of Panama back in '89 when General Noriega was kingpin. Secret gun running, importing crack cocaine into the black parts of Los Angeles, Pablo Escobar, Iran-Contra. You heard of that, right? Came back and bit Reagan in the ass. The following night, after Sands had given me the email address to Wendy DeVore, as well as continuing to chunt her on about all those bunch of dead bodies over Central America, I decided to write to her. Now, I don't know about you, but I had never written to a widow before. So I was really careful about the way I said it. I mean, times in this telling where I'm going to read bits from the book just so I get them right. Dear Wendy, Michael Sands kindly put me in touch with you. I'm a freelance writer stroke academic who would very much appreciate your answers to various questions surrounding the death of your husband. It feels terrible writing this, and I assure you that I don't wish to cause upset, but rather just to establish some clear facts about the case. Michael Sands has said that he does not see your husband's case as a tragic accident, but something more sinister, which I think is important for a range of reasons. I've written a book about the politics of Hollywood, which is about to be published by Pluto Press. One of the articles I wrote for the UK's Guardian mentioned Mr. DeVore's death, and I understand that Mr. Sands sent it to you. At this point, I'm particularly interested to know what happened to the private autopsy report, which Mr. Sands said was actually lost, though he said stolen, in the postal service. Yours sincerely, etc., etc. Incredibly, Wendy DeVore replied, and we agreed to speak via Skype. The line for that first Skype call was unnaturally terrible. I've never known Skype to be as unreliable. We repeatedly lost the connection during the hour-long call, and I had to go, into thin air on numerous occasions just to keep her talking. The line was so crackly, it was as though I was literally and metaphorically fighting through static to break into another world. But the gist and implication of conspiracy was pregnant in every word that I caught. She had, in fact, asked for a second autopsy report. And it was this report, not the original state report, that she believed had been intercepted in the post, along with a whole chunk of Gary's thigh bone by FedEx. FBI, CIA, and NSA all showed up at Wendy's house within days of the disappearance, commandeered all of Gary's stuff, apparently without the local sheriff's approval or knowledge, including Gary's computer, which contained the only other copy of the script, The Big Steal. None of it was ever seen again. For me, intermingled with nappy changing and baby clubs, the next stage consisted of near constant correspondence with accident specialists, private investigators, aqueduct workers, police, sheriffs, Gary's friends, ex-wives. I was showing my own dentist Gary's bridge work, and I was trying to drive in pitch black down the A303 with my headlights off just to see if it could be done. Plus, of course, I had daily contact with Wendy DeVore and Michael Sands. Although Wendy's copy of the autopsy report had apparently never arrived, although I could never entirely trust her recall of events, by this relentless email campaign, I was able to get the head coroner begrudgingly to part with an electronic copy. And it came to this startling conclusion, never reported in the press or known by the family. Homicide. So I had the story of the century, right? Fame, fortune, justice were just a click away. Even a headline, maybe. Government kills Hollywood screenwriter to stop him making anti-war film. On reflection, though, the doctor's murder view was not as decisive as one might hope. For a start, it was just the opinion of the lead coroner, not reflective of the other coroners who had been involved in the examination. And even that opinion appeared to be based on guesswork, really, plus one suspected a tendency in a private autopsy to side with the preordained view of the person who commissioned it, the widow. The data in the report didn't really tell us anything we didn't already know just from news reports, except to confirm that the 23 hand bones that had been found in the back of Gary's vehicle a couple of weeks after it had been drained of aqueduct water looked old, and so were probably not Gary DeVore's. Well, so what? The bones hadn't actually been tested. The lead coroner hadn't even seen them. He'd farmed that out to another guy, a specialist from Canada, and he was ignoring and avoiding my calls since I'd ill-advisedly rung him up one night when I had laryngitis, and he'd assumed that I was crazy pervert. There were no images of these bones, just a vague remark in this report that some 23 chunks of physical matter hadn't looked right. It was a very tenuous reason to jump to a murder verdict. Besides, look, I didn't have any like shady vans following me. I didn't have a horse's head on my pillow. The closest I came to that was some chicken carcasses that my wife had put into my bed as a way of like expressing fits of anger because I'd used foil instead of cling film to wrap up some leftovers. And you may ask why I was driven by all of this anyway. I mean, a mystery on the other side of the world, over a decade old at the time. Yeah, of course, my marriage was dead. It was shot like a misfired clown from a cannon into a brick wall. But quite beyond that, I did think that DeVore mattered. He was only one man, but in death, he represents so much more. How we think he died is a yardstick of trust between the people and the supposed democracies that run those people. No jokes, no polite laughter, no world-weary smirk on "Have I Got News for You" can cover the horror of political killing. And that horror is magnified 100-fold if the victim is simply trying to expose an important truth. So, what do you think happened next? Early hours on a glum, rain-speckled English morning, my filmmaker friend William in tow, I arrive at Heathrow Airport, having failed to persuade my co-writer on the Guardian piece, Robbie, to join us in the expedition. This is Will. Oh, Robbie, aren't you a little bit tempted? We might find some real proof. Robbie, that's exactly what I'm afraid of. And I do Robbie like Alan Bennett. He's from Milton Keynes, but you know, whatever. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, and what you two don't seem to understand. The most dangerous moment of all will come if you do find proof, and at that point I suggest that you have an escape plan. Will and I would not listen. We got into the plane, and as we buckled in and took off, it was like flying into a movie, literally and figuratively, with a camera right in my face. But what genre of movie were we in? Detective, thriller, romance, snuff? I flew to America. We arranged to meet Wendy DeVore by the Los Angeles War Memorial. And our first impression of her was the rev of an engine, and then, "Yeah, screw you too, asshole!" "Bitch!" screamed another driver. This felt real. It felt like Los Angeles, or at least Grand Theft Auto Los Angeles. Get in, Wendy instructs us. And we jump into the back of this large BMW. Nice, huh? I just hired it, but some fucker cut me up in the parking lot. Okay, boys, I'm taking you for pizza. Smiling and driving away, I noticed that there was someone else in the back seat. It was Frank, a character that I have not mentioned to you before, because I didn't think that there was any chance of him ever being a character in this story. Frank had held a high-level security clearance at the White House in the 1980s, and he'd shown no interest in talking to me online. But here he was. Frank had befriended Wendy in the immediate aftermath of Gary's disappearance. He was bold, he was pale from chemotherapy, but he was clearly a smart guy. Like, he's got a designer suit, he's got a Rolex watch, he's got a pressed shirt. He's laid back. He's a class act. He leans forward. The first thing he does is he shows me Polaroids of himself standing with George Bush, the president, and the Pope. Good enough credentials for me. And then he asks if I've ever been to Roswell. Wendy pulls over, and we hang out in the back of this diner. Will and Wendy turn to me as though they're expecting me to lead this thing. And of course, then I realize that I am kind of like running a murder investigation. So I say to Frank, was Gary the victim of a car accident, or do you think it was a cover-up? And unprecedentedly, Frank told me that he thought it was a government cover-up. Why? I mean, Gary wasn't part of the intelligence world, surely. Wendy told me he didn't even have a passport. Surely he was just a screenwriter. And then Wendy says, then Frank says, he drops this bombshell, basically. I'm going to stand up for this. Gary had certainly done travel outside the United States as background research to his screenplays in Central America, Panama area, with friends in the CIA at the time of Noriega's drug trafficking. He may have found out things that other people preferred he didn't. Did Frank have any contact with anyone from the Secret Services during his original investigation? Yes, and the strangest thing, he told me to go look at a website he thought that I'd find interesting. What was the website? It was all pornography, Matthew. Everything in the world was in there. What, like illegal pornography? What, like child pornography? I don't recall specifically, but that is my impression of what was in there. You know, governments do these kind of things to trap people. Well, then things fell apart during that interview, because Frank said that Gary's fate was definitely not sanctioned by the government, and that any cover-up would have been to protect lives and the intelligence that's being gathered. Frank was in fact not blaming the US government, which would have been my great headline, but instead he was blaming a hypothetical third player, unidentified drug barons, or another country's intelligence apparatus for Gary's fate. For all we know, that third person may be dead. It's like with Who Killed President Kennedy. There are a million stories. Was it organized crime? Was it the Russians? Was it the Cubans? You know, who was it? He left a pause and I couldn't help it. I said, well, that was the CIA, wasn't it? And we all laughed. And then Frank said very pointedly, definitely not. Will and I hired a car to travel through the desert, with Will reminding me not to drift off to the left and kill myself in what would have been a deliciously ironic death for his increasingly weird and personal film. Where are we going? To meet Dennis O'Keefe. Dennis O'Keefe was the private detective who had written a 200-page report on the DeVore case, but had apparently fallen out with Wendy DeVore over an arrangement for O'Keefe to have the rights to any emergent story. You misquote me, I'm gonna nail you. This was not a homicide. Dennis's theory was a real problem because he had an explanation for why Gary might have turned around on that road. He pointed out that during the night of Gary's disappearance, the police had set up a roadblock to catch a man who had robbed a nearby store at knife point earlier in that evening. The Highway Patrol, their report reads that a roadblock was established at 2:04 a.m. That was a full 30 minutes after Gary passed the aqueduct, okay? So it was not thought to be important, okay? But it takes 30 minutes for the police to establish a roadblock, okay? Back that off 2:04 a.m. What you got? About 1:35, just as Gary's going past the aqueduct. The police closed down both sides of the freeway. Gary would have seen the roadblock being formed. He would have seen blue flashing lights. Gary had a gun in the car. Gary had marijuana in the car. What do you think he's gonna do? What, you think he might have just turned around on it? Exactly. And all the time that Dennis is telling me this, he's toying with a bottle and doing that magic trick where you put a coin through it and saying things like, I can make you believe anything I want. So, yeah. The problem is he'd watered my seed of doubt. In the end, people do crazy shit on the roads. It's possible. In fact, over the years, a couple of people had even smashed into the ravine not far from Gary's spot. I wasted a year of my life on this case. Now you've wasted your time coming all the way over here. The CIA is being accused. Wendy's being accused. And it was all just some dumb accident. Will and I returned to LA in silence. The canyon closing around me like a heavy curtain. I figured that Wendy would be pissed off, and she was. But then, late in the day, the next day, a chink of light, because I'd brought with me the Highway Patrol report. And I looked through it and I found that the police hadn't closed down both sides of the freeway. And as such, there was no reason for Gary to have turned around after all. I chased Dennis by email and he said that he'd seen police radio logs to substantiate that part of his story, but he couldn't provide them. In other words, the crazy conspiracy theory was back on. But where was all this headed? Like, in the last half an hour, I have given you a lovely first two acts. I've given you the mystery for Act 1, and I've given you a kooky little road trip for Act 2. Where is Act 3 going? Don't answer. Before we left Los Angeles, we just had time to visit Michael Sands. And I'd hoped that he'd say something different in person, like Frank had. We showed up at his flat in 7X. We buzzed our way into the elevator and then up into his flat. And he lounged around in sweatpants and gave us bagels and American footballs and frisbees for my kids. And they're all labeled with the US Army logo. a phone call comes in and Michael Sands leaves us alone for a few minutes. I mean, what are we even doing here? And then he asks us to leave because he's tired. And then we get into his lift again to leave. And then he calls me back off camera without Will to say, I hope to be working with them soon again, Matthew. What, the CIA? There's been a shift around of personnel there. Give me a few weeks and I'll see what I can get you. Back in England, on a gloriously sunny autumnal day, I stood on this hilltop overlooking my hometown of Bath. And I brought Will along to sort of capture me on camera. Over to the right of me, down the slope, there's this underground bunker built during the Cold War where the royal family and Prime Minister would have been housed in the event of a nuclear war. Out in front, we could see the Roman baths, which are belching sulfur into the sky on top of a stone edifice of the goddess Minerva. But the real reason that I brought Will to this place was because standing right behind me was a building called Sham Castle, which is a folly built in 1783 by this rich Englishman for no reason at all except to show off to his buddies. If you look around the back of the castle wall, there is nothing. There are no windows. There are no rooms. There's nothing. It's just an edifice. And was this representative of the Gary DeVore conspiracy theory, or the edifice of democracy itself? Panama City, December 1989. A thick-bearded man in his late 40s surveyed the surrounding junglescape from the tarmac at Howard Air Force Base. Behind him, the fading whine of a C-14 Starlifter on its return to Miami International Airport. The bearded man was Gary DeVore. Everyone else bustling around him was dressed in woolen Class A uniforms, lugging their heavy-duty green duffel bags off the hulking cargo plane. Gary wore standard cowboy gear, jeans and a flannel shirt, and carried nothing but his Stetson. Everything he needed would be provided by US military intelligence when he reached his post with the 470th Brigade on Corozal. Trudging across the steaming asphalt in 39-degree heat, Gary could smell the faint scent of smoke from distant wildfires crawling across the terrain. Gary stayed for a fortnight as an unpaid and informal creative, enhancing US strategy, working alongside psychic warriors, remote viewers, black propagandists, and death squads. 2 weeks wasn't much time, but it was time enough to feel the heavy weight of long hours in a windowless skiff, a sensitive compartmentalized information facility. Time enough to see the F-17 stealth fighters dropping heavy ordnance onto acres of historic buildings turn to ashes in the old quarter of Panama City, the tiny rich suburbs left untouched. Time enough to see Panamanian dictator General Manuel Noriega dislodged from his hiding place by an American siege that entailed blasting 130 decibels of death metal through loudspeakers around the clock. And then the silence of sweet victory. Gary accompanied a small contingent of troops into the city to assess the damage. By then the bodies had been removed, but the pungent scent of burnt flesh hung heavily in the humid air and clung to their clothes. Floors and tiled walls were stained in dark blood and hardwired into Gary's memory. Gary's contingent inched their way through the area, inhaling the smell of pulverized concrete, gunpowder, and death. He lifted his feet over stray cats and dogs that had been splattered on the pavement and alleyways. But these were just teasers, really. What really shocked Gary was what he had heard from his colleagues behind enemy lines, the rumors that circulated around 12 men known as the Clowns, those operatives who tested laser weapons and literally melted civilians and flung poison darts to produce massive bleeding, the same people who dumped living beings from helicopters into the sea for sport, The same men who, after their little wars in Central America and the Middle East, graduated to some of the highest scientific, media, and political jobs in the land. Before his flight home, Gary DeVore stood on his hotel balcony and stared out at the city, areas of it still convulsing in flame like Nero's Rome. It troubled him, his minor role. He stepped back inside and grabbed a bottle of tequila off the bureau. And one of the things you're thinking is, can a movie get you killed? Surely there are other ways to prevent screenwriters from doing things that the government doesn't like. Even if the big steal was shaping up to be a major anti-war statement, aren't there more subtle means of censorship? Well, actually, the studio that had been working with Gary on this greenlit project actually had no known association with the CIA at all, or even the Department of Defense. Even after Gary's disappearance, the studio kept on insisting, we're going to make this film and it's going to have DeVore's name on it. The big steal would have shown the American invasion of Panama for what it was, a cynical and barbaric assault. And according to news reports, the film would also have referred to a CIA bank robbery. Trundling down the M5 so my kids could see their grandparents. I love driving. It gives me time to think, to meditate. Throughout the 1990s, the CIA had kept growing, preening itself, but without a real threat, without a justification for its existence. Fascism was gone, long gone. Communism was gone. And actually, some senators at that time were proposing a bill to abolish the agency. The clandestine services had devolved into a sham, like that castle that I was referring to, except for that rather than being like a quaint tourist attraction, the CIA is armed to the teeth. Gary's betrayal of his former masters might have been a slap in the face just at the time when major personnel in the national security apparatus were feeling at their most vulnerable. Was I being paranoid? I don't know if you've read the book Catch-22, Joseph Heller, and in that book, the anti-hero soldier, Yossarian, keeps complaining that people are trying to kill him. And his friend points out, well, it being World War II and all, like they're trying to kill everyone. And Yossarian asks rhetorically, what difference does that make? There was only one other pathway really still to explore, and by fair means or foul, I just had to know what was in Gary's script. I asked Gary's friends, his wives, his agent, his manager. None of them knew. There's like this one other source that I could perhaps try, like Gary's main boss, like distanced boss at the studio, who I was calling Mr. Bigwig. He was like a billionaire. And he'd given no indication to journalists covering the disappearance, that he knew what was in the script or anything. But with a touch of Wendy's charm rather than mine, Bigwig actually sent us within minutes the drafted script and Gary's treatment for the film very quickly. Now, the script was not a final draft, I emphasize. Which of course had been completed but had disappeared on the weekend of his disappearance. But nevertheless, it was a draft from earlier in that year. Now, in Gary's notes, let me check, we see the face of a peasant with the fiery invasion flashing in his eyes. Elsewhere, American gunships fly low, scanning for targets of opportunity. Refugees trudge along the tracks, but it is an exodus to nowhere set against a tropical downpour and streets littered with charred cars, hunks of bombed buildings and dead bodies. The tone that bleeds through this script feels angry, even personal. To protect this fragile democracy, remarks one of the American characters, we'd smoke the whole fucking country. Later, the central character, maybe based on Gary himself, is on the hotel balcony. He stares out at the city convulsing in flames. And disillusioned, he steps back inside and grabs a bottle of tequila off the bureau. I rather felt like downing some tequila myself. Yes, the screenplay was very anti-war, on a par with the most anti-war films that Hollywood has ever would have produced. But I mean, a CIA bank robbery, some anti-war vibes in a fictional film. So what? And then I finally met someone who really helped me put the pieces together. John Irving, Gary's old friend, who had made with Gary that original film about mercenaries, Dogs of War, and Raw Deal, and had produced Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Gary was having trouble with the script that he was writing. He was talking more as a journalist than as a scriptwriter. He was an investigator, saying things like, "Do you know they had a slush fund in Panama?" Okay. Do you think that Gary could have been an unstable ally for the CIA? Oh, yeah. Gary was at war with himself and the world. Do you think it was murder? What could Gary have found out? What did he find out? Gary had found a piece of top secret information. Noriega had a ranch where he filmed officers, politicians, senior Pentagon people, and they were fucking boys, girls, taking drugs, everything. He had a huge file. Apparently he was prepared to blackmail. Gary had found a tape. Now for weeks, months even, and I'm embarrassed that I'm willing to admit the embarrassment. I think it may have been a couple of years. Will and I had just dismissed Irvin's comments as speculation, a rhetorical flourish from a creative. And then it dawned on me, were his allegations mirrored in Gary's script? You know, in the screenplay, a Panamanian character questions the bloodshed. And he says, "All this to arrest Noriega? Nothing is what you think it is. Sounds like the Pentagon wanted a bank robbery and the whole war is just a diversion." A newspaper article that I acquired from the British Library, never digitized, never read by anyone since the day of its publication in 1989, added further evidence. Noriega had indeed recorded tapes, according to 2 US diplomats. But even here, the trail ran cold. The journalist who broke that story was killed by sniper fire in El Salvador just after publication. But I'm very confident that Gary's screenplay dramatized the allegation that the US stole back the worst personal secrets of America's elite. I was waiting on information from Michael Sands when Wendy emailed me to say that Sands had been in a high-end LA supermarket when he had choked to death on a free meat sample. I'd spoken to Michael just a few days before, and he had literally done jazz hands at me and said, "I am back in the CIA." With Sands gone, like, my search for answers over Gary had taken a really serious blow. But 5 years in, deeply mired in unemployability, my academic career atrophied, still separated from my wife, but still forever trapped, single under the same roof. There was nowhere to go but back to Devore. I was so desperate I chased up an old lead, the coroner who had received the hand bones, Dr. S, who I'd rung when I'd had laryngitis. Now, half out of carelessness, half out of inconsiderateness, half out of willful provocation, I emailed Dr. S, accusing him of medical malpractice in failing to examine the hand bones properly. And I added for effect that I had evidence of a massive miscarriage of justice. Now, for a man who had previously been reluctant to talk to me despite my 3-year email campaign, within minutes, the doctor had given me his cell phone number. Yeah, sure, like maybe the hands weren't right, but we couldn't extract DNA from them. So what? If the bones were wrong, then this means that the sheriff sent the wrong hand bones. And it's hard to see how they could have done this by accident. I see. And if the motivation was to silence the widow, it could suggest that they were trying to cover up the man's identity or to cover up damage to his hands, maybe evidence of torture. I see. I managed to extract from the doctor a document that I didn't even know existed. Photographs of Gary's 23 hand bones from his left hand, except for they weren't 23 hand bones from his left hand. They were 3 chunks of something. They didn't even look like bones. They looked like rocks. So, my raft of hard new facts. I had established beyond reasonable doubt that the police did pass off to the coroner the wrong material as Gary DeVore's hand bones. And I had photographic evidence to prove it. Gary's script was much more anti-war than anyone had previously known, and there was no doubt in my mind that he was threatening to publicize very embarrassing real information about top US officials. There was an attempt by the intelligence services to at least cover up Gary's relationship with them, as material from his house was covertly taken without the say-so of regular law enforcement. And Gary had gone abroad with clandestine services to war zones. So what do you think? Oh, God. Definite conspiracy, certain murder, bungled cover-up, reasonable suspicion, cause for eyebrow raising. Perfect joke. And the case was over. There was nowhere else to go with it. And then things started happening that were beyond my control. Dr. Matthew Alford. Yeah, who's that? You're writing on Gary DeVore and the intelligence community. There's a major piece breaking in the mail on Sunday. We can collaborate. I dubbed him Lucky, the new and 13th clown. Lucky was not like anyone else in this story, not even Frank. Frank was essentially a high-level civil servant who put the polish on presidential statements. Lucky was simply one of these people who is not here for public consumption. One of those people who walk between the raindrops and don't get wet. Chile, Bosnia, Iraq, Boeing, Disney. For the sake of convenience, I'm going to ask you now to decide how much you trust me to reflect the integrity of this whole investigation. But hey, we've traveled a long way now, haven't we? Nearly 50 minutes. And almost everything that you read is fictional, politically skewed, and a lot of it's downright fraudulent. So why change the habit of a lifetime? Lucky made me feel uncomfortable. I could have asked some very difficult questions. Was Gary's screenplay about a US bank robbery based on activities ordered and conducted by you personally? Remember that scene from A Few Good Men? You want answers. I want the truth. You can't have it. This is not Hollywood. And I asked him the only question that I possibly could. What are you actually able to tell me about Gary DeVore? I have no inside track on anything to do with this, and life is too short to look into every last detail. The police report said Gary died in a case of wrong-way driving, and I have no reason to doubt it. But I was not a fellow traveler of Gary DeVore. A fellow traveler? Like what politically? Or you mean, what, in the car? Literally? Shuffling, A long pause. Had he even heard? Of course, I have seen things that make me think Gary could have been the victim of hidden forces. I just don't think it was the case here. What do you mean? In this business, you have to make split-second decisions on who you can trust, and these determine whether you get out of a situation dead or alive. What do you mean about the hidden forces? I've seen things to do with extrasensory perception, ESP, things that prove that things can be invoked beyond this dimension. Angels. Satan, of course. The Stargate thing that Robbie talks about. Yeah. I saw that on Louis Theroux. It was just some defunct old small-scale NASA Pentagon program to look into the possibility of extrasensory perception. Right. Well, my work has gone well since the Gary Devore investigation. I've got a career now, teaching during the days. I do stand-up at nights. I'd coped barely with repeated threats to my home, to my livelihood, my own sense of security. Nothing that happened to me was in the national interest or rational or proportionate. But hey, that's marriage. I'm doing gigs now every week, every Wednesday, 8 o'clock at Feel Good Bar. And thanks for tuning in, and keep supporting live comedy. I'm Matthew Alford. Good night.